Hey everybody, welcome back to Protists. We're talking about types of protists. As we learned in the last section what protists were, now we're going to talk about the different types of protists. You can see on the right hand side that there are three types of protists. There's plant-like protists, atom-like protists, and fungus-like protists. In most cases, this is where the rise of the kingdom of fungus came from, the kingdom of plants came from, and the kingdom of animals came from, were these protists. So they're kind of a critical kingdom to understand where plants, animals, and fungus came from. So you have plant-like, animal-like, and fungus-like. Those are the three types of protists. So let's start with plant-like protists. Plant-like protists are producers. We talked about that in the last section, that producers will create their own food through photosynthesis. They live in soil, bark, fresh water, even salt water. They produce oxygen, which is an important job for everyone on Earth. Examples would be like euglenoids, which is like euglenias, dinoflagellates, diatoms, and algae, green, red, and blue. So let's talk about euglenias or euglenoids. So euglenoids are producers. You can see that they're green in color, so therefore they have chloroplasts. But when it's dark and they don't have the ability to produce their own food, they're heterotrophs. So they actually have the ability to bring in some food. So then they have unicellular, so they're made up of one cell, and they're found mostly in fresh water. Some of them have flagella tails. Those are these whip-like tails you see there. It says flagellum. So this is a euglena diagram up close. It has an eye spot. That's the red thing you see there. It senses light. It's not necessarily an eye, it just senses light, so it can move towards the light. You have a nucleus. That's that gray circle. You have chloroplast, which they do the same thing as a plant cell does. It's where they create chlorophyll through the process of photosynthesis. Then you have a cell membrane and a flagellum, which is the tail that allows them to move. Then we have dinoflagellates. They're unicellular. These have stiff plates on the outside of them. They're kind of like anchors. They have two flagella tails, so they can move and even change direction quickly. They can even glow in the dark. And you're going to find these in the ocean. Now remember, these are going to be microscopic, so you're not going to be able to see these things just when you go visit the ocean. They're going to be all microscopic. Then you have diatoms. These are unicellular, glass-like cell walls. They're used in toothpaste, believe it or not, and other scouring products, and in filters. These will allow you to, when you brush your teeth, this is just something that's ground up in there that allows you kind of slight abrasion against your teeth to polish them up and make them look good. Green algae, green due to chlorophyll, mostly unicellular, but some form colonies, and few are multicellular. They live in freshwater, saltwater, and a few on land. Volvox, and volvox are really cool because they have these cool circular patterns to them. And it's a colony. There's a bunch of little ones inside of there to make up the colony of volvox. Red algae. So this is, if you've ever been to the ocean before, we call it seaweed. So it's multicellular. It's called seaweed. Lives in salt water. Wait, it can be used in ice cream and a hair conditioner? Yeah, you can. Actually, you can add a flavor to it. And hair conditioner, as it's kind of ground up and turned into a paste. It's good for, the nutrients are good for the hair and the follicles. And it's eaten actually in some Asian cultures. Brown algae, multicellular, also called seaweed, have large leaves. They're not called leaves, they're not necessarily plants, they call them blades. They have sacs called air bladders. If you ever find these at the ocean, you'll see these little bubbles. They're usually dried up on the beach. They have roots called holdfasts. They live in salt water. It's used in pudding and salad dressing. Yeah, kind of gives it some of the color that you have there. All right, so let's talk about the three types you have. So we just talked about plant-like protists, so now we're going to move on to animal-like protists, called protozoans, because they became proto, they're before animals. Heterotrophs means they have to consume food, and all are unicellular. They're characterized by how they move. So you have pseudopods, cilia, flagella, and others, which are like types of parasites. We're going to talk about each one of those. So let's talk about protists with pseudopods. Pseudopods, it's a fake foot. It's not really a foot, it's a fake foot. It moves by extending their pseudopod, their fake foot, and pulling the rest of their bodies forward. Pseudopods are also used to trap food. An example is called an amoeba. This is what amoeba looks like up close. You have the whole pseudopod, which is a fake foot, a contractile vacuole. I can grab things and shoot water out. An endoplasm, plasm inside, an ectoplasm, plasm on the outside, or towards the outer edge. It's kind of like cytoplasm. They have more specific names. You have a membrane, a nucleus, a food vacuole. So when it does capture the food with its pseudopod or its fake foot, it can actually store that food in a food vacuole. All right, we've covered a lot of things on protists. So little mini quiz. What are three groups of protists? Name two of the four types of green protists. What does protozoan mean? How are animal-like protists classified? And list one thing that a pseudopod is used for. Just to quiz yourself a little bit about protists. Protists with cilia. Cilia, tiny hair-like structures. It can move by beating the tiny cilia, act like little oars rowing in the water. Cilia also help capture food. An example here would be paramecium. Here's a paramecium. You can see what those little oars, that cilia looks like. It's going to capture food, so it's going to capture food with the cilia, then move it towards the mouth, or otherwise the oral groove. It kind of has a little bit of a throat here called the gullet. Then it has a contractile vacuole, a cell membrane, a macronucleus, and a micronucleus. So previously we talked about there might have two nucleus of how it might transfer its genetic material for sexual reproduction. That's what happens here, or conjugation. That's what happens here is that you have the micronucleus and the macronucleus. So the micronucleus is the one that's going to transfer the genetic material over to the other paramecium. All right, protists with flagella. Flagella, it's a whip-like tail. Moved by beating their long flagella, can have one or more flagella. Most flagellates live in a host and can be helpful, and it could be harmful. An example could be Giardia. So Giardia could give you a really upset stomach. Other animal-like protists are characterized by the way they live, like parasites. They're going to go inside of a host, in our case will be humans, and it will cause diseases. Plasmodium vivax, we talked about that in the last group. It causes malaria because it's a parasite in the mosquito. It's also a parasite, and then us when we get bit. So then it talks about fungus-like protists. Fungus-like protists are heterotrophs. They have cell walls, similar to a plant cell. They produce by forming spores. So spores are like seeds, but we don't call them seeds because they're not plants. We call them spores, and that's what a fungus will reproduce with, is with spores. They're able to move at some point in their life. Some examples might be water molds or even slime molds. Easier to hike in the woods, you might find some of these cool slime molds out there on rocks and such, it looks like. This is pretzel slime molds, for instance. Then you have water molds. They live in water or moist environments. They look like tiny threads with a fuzzy covering. They sometimes attack food like potatoes and cabbage and corn. Actually, this was a big problem in Ireland, called the Irish potato famine, is that these water molds came over or in the potato fields, and it started to really ruin the crops. Then we have other slime molds. They live in moist soil and on decaying plants and on trees. They're very colorful. So you might see these when you're also walking in the woods. You might see some bright colors on trees. You wonder what they are. It's moved by forming pseudopods. So they do have the ability to move, but they have those fake feet again. And they'll feed on bacteria and other microorganisms, tiny living things. All right, and that brings us to the end of this presentation. All right, everybody. See you later.